everyone. My name is Kylie Hellman. I'm a student at SFA, and I'll be introducing Dawn Stover's presentation on fire as the Great Renewer. Dawn joined the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service in November of 2021 as the study leader and agronomist at the East Texas Plant Materials Center in Nacogdoches. She is currently working on germplasm adaptation trails, conservation plant releases, and seeding rate studies to benefit landowners and land managers in the western coastal plain. Experience the amazing botanical richness of East Texas forests that are managed with prescribed fire. The Winston 8 Ranch, a 2014 Leopold Conservation Award recipient, will be featured and boasts a botanical survey including nearly 900 distinct plant species.
Okay, so I get to follow my protege. I got to work with Jordan when she was a student worker 2.5 years ago, right? Sure. And Jordan moved off to Dallas Arboretum, and then, well, she had fallen in love with an East Texas boy, and so she came back after she married him, and I got to snatch her up, and I got to work with her for a very long time at the SFA Gardens. I in a new role in life at the NRCS, but I do still stay in touch with Jordan every now and again when we talk plants and other things. So today we're going to talk about fire as the Great Renewer. Some of y'all were on my field trip yesterday, and so you'll get to see all the things we didn't get to see because it's like November now, and so there's not much blooming. So I'll kind of take you for a botanical tour, a floral tour of that particular property. So this is the view. This view from the clubhouse where we had our little lunch yesterday. This property is about 3,300 acres. I drove by this property for years and years and years and had no idea how extremely special it was. When we think of the loblolly forests of East Texas, the southeastern United States, this is kind of what we think, what we see, what it typically looks like. Most of our forested lands are in production for timber and for nothing else whatsoever. And this is typically what we see in the typical management style: real thick, kind of mid-story, understory. There's not a lot of plant diversity there. There's not a lot of sunlight hitting that ground, and those trees are really, really densely packed together. What we really want to see. And I love this comparison. I love this side by side. This is on the Winston property. This side is managed by fire. This side is not managed at all.
Oh, wow.
So isn't that amazing what you do? So you can see in this area, I'm going to find my little green pointer. You see lots of sunlight down in there. And once we get sunlight down in that forest, that's still a pretty densely packed forest. That basal area is really pretty high. It's probably ready for a thin at some point. But when we start getting sunlight to the ground, what happens? We get a lot of plant material. We have a lot of potential in that ground underneath it. This is what a really good open canopy forest in East Texas might have looked like 200, 300 years ago, probably a little less dense than this. We're really more of a forested prairie, or a prairie forest, if you will, give or take whatever stuff you want to. So we were typical long leaf, short leaf, overstory, until you get into the more mesic situations where the loblolly picks up. But a gentleman could ride a horse at a full gallop in East Texas without any branches knocking his hat off, and he could run straight with that horse really quickly because there was nothing in his way. The trees were spaced widely enough that he could do that. So it was a pine savanna, if you will. Fire in Texas. For a very, very long time, Smokey the Bear did a really great job of eliminating a lot of fires in Texas. We thought fire was a bad thing. We thought fire was destructive. It was killing everything. And when we think of the catastrophic wildfires in the California area and Oregon area, and that's kind of how we were treating fire here in East Texas. But our ecosystem was actually fire evolved. our species, longleaf and shortleaf, were not necessarily fire dependent, but the understory was dependent on that fire to keep things in check so that the good diversity can happen. If you have a properly managed forest, and if you have a really good understory with fine fuels like little blue stem grass, you're going to have a really low and slow fire that kind of takes care of that mid-shrub layer that gets a little aggressive and chokes everything out. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about a measure of diversity. And I do have to put my NRCS hat on right now. So this particular landowner, he is really good at finding agencies that will help him put conservation on the ground on his property. Not only does he use the NRCS for that, but he also uses Texas Parks and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. There's a lot of government agencies and non-government agencies like Quail Forever that will help you put conservation on your property. And so, just for an example, with NRCS, he uses EQIP funding to do site prep, to put in burn lanes, to do prescribed fire, and also to replant. So there's a lot of ways that and agencies that can help you create a really neat ecosystem and diverse habitat. So we started going out to this property, looking at all the wildflowers, and I worked at SFA Gardens, and I was really just fell head first deep in love with native plants. That's a conversation for another day how I got there. It came from a beekeeper that gave me the riot act on a particular plant that was native. We started going out to the Winston property, and he said, "Hey, collect anything you want. Let's see what we can do with it." And so we started bringing some of the natives that were somewhat common in the horticultural trade, and then some that weren't in the horticultural trade that should probably be there. And so that was my goal, was to bring those piney woods ecosystem native plants, which are not available, to the trade. And so we sold them at the SFA Gardens plant sale, and a lot of my babies are still there with Jordan, and so we'll see a few of them tomorrow. But that's kind of where my perspective comes from. That's what I started looking at this property, and there were so many things, and we ended up hiring a botanist named Eric Keith. He was one of our field trip leaders yesterday, to come out there and do a botanical survey. And so he would come out once a month throughout the year, and he said, "I'm going to stop coming when I find 10 or fewer plants on my trips." And so it took us the better part of 2 years for him to find 10 or fewer plants on the trips. So currently my database, and I think it's probably not totally accurate, I think we need to add a few more species, but my database right now sits at 881 different plant species on this property. Not all of them are native. He did catalog, the oaks by the house, and the shrubs and stuff, and the turfgrass by the house, and there's some real weird disjunct plants that occur, like with the ground material that's over by the well pads, or the driveway material that came in with that, and that kind of pads the area a little bit, but largely I would say 89% of that list is completely 100% native to the area. So just by the numbers in that property, it's about 3,300 acres. And literally, if you drive from here to Houston, you will drive right by this property. It's in between here and the Angelina River. There's 882, sounds kind of close, 882 documented plant species, 133 grass in the grass family, 21 different species in the mint family, 19 different in the beech family, 66 in the pea family and bean family, 72 different sedges. Sedges are way above my head. That's above my pay grade. And then 116 in the aster family and 20 in the carrot family. So my favorite family. I am a crazy pollinator, wonderful, loving person. And so my favorite family is the aster family. Jordan showed a lot of great aster family members, and of course they're, I think, in my opinion, the best at bringing in the pollinators. So let's talk a little bit about some groups that we find there. And we found, I don't remember how many milkweed species we had found, like 4 or 5 different milkweed species. So I think the one that is like the most unique and the most really cool is the clasping milkweed, or Asclepias and plexicollis. And I'll note, Dr. Van Clay mentioned this morning about the common names. You'll know plant common names are not regulated. So everybody, you can make one up and you can go across the state lines and somebody's going to call it something different. So I like to pick a resource and stick with it. And so because I work for the USDA, I do use USDA plants database. So that's where the common, sometimes they're terrible common names. It's not my fault. And sometimes the botanical names are really bad too. The botanists back in the day, they had some dirty minds, you know. Anyway, so this is Asclepias and plexicolis. I was looking funny at that because I thought I spelled it wrong. The clasping milkweed, you can see how the leaves kind of wrap around the stems on that milkweed. This is one of the taller milkweeds we see. I've seen them up to about 3.5 feet or so. They're not real obvious because the flowers are, this is the most colorful I've ever seen a flower. They're sometimes more greenish. I would never call that red. I think I would call that brown. But they're really kind of exotic and interesting when you get up close to them. I very, very rarely find any fruit on these. And I think that one, they don't get pollinated, and two, I think the deer browse either the flowers or the seed pods before they go. The butterfly milkweed is probably the most common milkweed that we find across the state of Texas. It's very, very orange here in East Texas. Typically, we don't see it this dark. I very rarely see any yellows in the area. You know what kind of wasp that is? Do you remember? I don't know. But they are pollinated by a variety of different insects, and they actually have to get their legs inside the flowers to pull the big heavy pollen grains out of it to get from species or from flower to flower. Wasps are really good and dependent on pollinating milkweed. And I was joking with Peter, if y'all got your little goodie bags, there was a postcard in there that we made from flowers from East Texas, and I really wanted to put the red ring milkweed on there, but I can't find a photo, and I have one here, but it didn't fit in that little postcard thing. I cannot find a photo of a red ring milkweed without beetles having amorous times on every photo I looked at, and there was different species of beetles in every photo that I had, and they were loving life and loving each other.
So it's the red light district.
Yeah, so red light, right. So I don't like that common name because it's really hard to say. Red ring, really hard to say. But there is a little red ring on each of the flowers right there, and that's why it's called that. It's Asclepias variegata. Any of y'all ever try to grow milkweed from seed?
Yeah.
This is one of the horriblest. That is not an English word. This is one of the worst milkweeds to try to grow. They're very, very, they're easy to germinate, super easy to germinate, really hard to grow on off into a bigger plant. So we're working on that. We're working with mycorrhizae, I think is the answer. But this is one of the hardest. This is actually one of the most abundant. Yes, ma'am.
How long a root do they have? They grow up my place naturally. So does the other one.
I have not dug this one, and I don't know if this is fibrous or if it's got a taproot.
Because one's in a bad place, and I'd like to move it. So I'm afraid to move it.
That's something that you need to probably look into. You can research on whether it's got a taproot or if it's
Because it's right by bird feeder. I guess I just moved bird feeder. Won't have to do.
You know, I would value the milkweed over the bird feeder. You can transplant milkweed, but I would say largely you will fail 90% of the time.
Yeah. I want to keep what I've got.
Yeah, and
so beautiful.
So people want to rescue milkweed in situations, and I would say unless they're putting a parking lot or a building on top of that milkweed, leave it where it is.
Yes.
Yep. So there. That's my soapbox. This is a really interesting and cool milkweed. This is the world milkweed, Asclepias verticillata. It looks a lot similar to another milkweed, but you can sort of tell that the leaves, they're very, very thin, but they're whorled around that stem. And they're kind of inconspicuous. This particular plant, and this is yesterday on our first stop, Jackie, this is where I found this particular plant. That's where this photo comes from. These were the tallest ones that I've ever seen. Usually I see them, about a foot tall or so. This is super, super, super sandy soil right here. There's a lot of really xeric sandhill type endemic species that occur here. And this is probably one of the tallest plants I've seen. And it's super easy to miss when it goes into fruit, because the fruit is just teeny, teeny tiny. Think of a green bean, but half the size, so half the diameter to that. Come on.
Do we want to leave the door open so it's kind of warm in here?
That's fine. I'm warm.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So this is probably one of the most common milkweeds in East Texas, but it's the most overlooked because the flowers are green. You're driving down the highway and you're driving 75 miles an hour and you totally overlook it until you recognize it for the first time, and then you see it absolutely everywhere. So this is a relatively easier milkweed to grow off after germination. They still are going to need that mycorrhizal treatment. We've discovered that Asclepias perennis, which does not occur on this property, and Asclepias incarnata are really pretty easy without that mycorrhiza addition or stratification of the seed. But this one actually blooms at least twice a year, if not 3 times a year. It'll bloom in spring. Sometimes it'll throw something off in summer, and it'll throw another set of blooms in late summer. And then we've got the milk vines, or the milk. Yeah.
How many Asclepias are there in the East Texas area?
In East Texas, I would say there's at least 6 to 7. A lot of them occur more in the bog type areas, like the rubra and the red one that's at the Watson Preserve. And there's another white one. Can't remember the species. It's real similar to this that occurs in that boggy type situation. Ovovata. No, I'd say there's at least 10. So if y'all have never seen the milkweed guide that Jason Singlers has done for Texas Parks and Wildlife, that is an awesome publication, and he includes the ranges for each of those milkweeds. So it includes all of the state of Texas, but it will tell you if it occurs where you are. That's a great publication, and it's free. It's a PDF online. So it's just the milkweed guide of Texas. So I have actually never seen a monarch caterpillar on one of these plants. However, from what I understand, if there's not milkweed available, they will actually utilize this particular plant as a host plant. This is Matlea hertelliflora. I think it's just been described as this species, and this is one of those common names that I think is hairy face spiny pod. I mean, who came up with that? I don't know. The fruit is actually kind of sort of. It's not graphic. It looks like it's spiny. There's a lot of bumps on it. It's not painful to the touch, but there's a lot of bumps on it that make it look spiny. It's a hard sell in the nursery, so it's maybe one of those specialty things. But it's really cool, and it's really quite common on this particular property. And this is a scientific thing that I don't love. This is the angular fruit milk vine, or Matlea gonocarpus. Leave that one up to your imagination. Use your Latin derivatives to figure out that name. But it's got green flowers, and I think that's really cool. And they're star-shaped. And this one right here had a really, really heavy flowering set. But if you look real closely, those flowers are kind of thick-petaled and deformed. So we think there was something maybe viral going on with that particular plant. That one's not going to be, it's not going to produce any fruit. It's going to be sterile, unfortunately. So asters, I think, in East Texas are completely underlooked in the horticultural trade, in the nursery trade. And we have so many options that should be there. Now, you'll find the calico aster in all kinds of plant catalogs and things like that, but we don't have southern genetics in the industry. So typically when I order in a calico aster from a plant catalog or something like that, it won't bloom for me because I don't get cold soon enough for that particular genetic. So that's kind of what I wanted. Those questions I wanted to answer when I was at the SFA garden. So. So the late purple asters of Tricha patens. I think this is a really beautiful and dainty aster. This is a really great addition. They get kind of tall, so if you had sort of a grassland type setting, this would be a really good complement for that. And this was a new one for me, the barren silky aster, and I don't think this has any horticultural value, but of course it does have a good wildlife and pollinator value. It's a beautiful and it's a dark aster. It's just not really robust, so you don't see this a lot. So Tricha patens. And this was on my, do you have plants that are on your bucket list? This one was on my bucket list because of the species. And I don't even know, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the species, but it's the I call it the oo aster. And it was on my bucket list because I thought that was a really kind of neat name. And lo and behold, we're walking around this property and our botanist said, hey, that's this aster, it's the sky blue aster. I really like the color on it. And the foliage is a little more dense and sort of robust, much more so than the barren silky aster. So I think this one has some potential too for the horticultural trade. And what I want to do is have these things available to our gardeners so they can't use that excuse as that, well, this is not available or I can't find this. Well, it's our job to make that happen for all of you guys. And so that's just where I'm coming from. This is a really, I've never come across this. You know, sometimes plants are on your bucket list and you didn't know they were there. So this is one, and this is head height or taller. It grows in sort of wetter areas as you're going down Mesic slopes to a creek. The Doling area or southern whitetop. It blooms pretty late in the year. We want all those late season, pollen and nectar sources for our pollinators that are hibernating, or going into hibernation, or migrating. So we want to fuel them up as best we can. And all of those late asters are really good for that. And this one, the small-head doll's daisy, Boltonia diffusa, it is the coolest little plant because the leaves are so teeny tiny, you really just kind of see stems, and then all of a sudden it explodes in white little flowers all over it. So it's got a very unique texture that I think would work well because it sort of the foliage is sort of opaque. You can see through it. So you could do lots of different design techniques with this particular thing. It's very heavy blooming and it also blooms for a very long time. So small head doll's daisy. This is an aster that was really new to me. We moved out to the west side of Nacogdoches about 5 years ago, and I started seeing this on the side of the road. I really liked it, and I stopped. And asters are they're real soft to the touch. They're not real stiff plants. When I touch this one, the stems are really stiff. They're not woody, but they feel woody, and the foliage is really stiff. So this is actually the southern prairie aster. And a lot of times when we take our wildflowers and we bring them into horticulture, into good situations with lots of water, really good soil, they are on steroids. Sometimes our plants don't like that. Sometimes our natives are like, no, we want this lean, sandy soil. But sometimes they come into the cultivation and they're like, oh boy, thank you very much. And so in the wild, I find these little kind of naked, kind of sad stems, and then we put them into a nursery situation and they're on steroids. And that's what this particular plant did for us. Jordan showed a blue lobelia that did that for us. It was a really sad, spindly little thing out in the wild, and we put it in the nursery, and it was very, very robust. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We like it when it works because then the average person will have a lot better success with it. But this is the southern prairie aster. You can see my little leaf cutter bee. I love this little lady. She collects pollen in her abdomen. And that's the little bee that cuts all the circles in your foliage. If you have a red bud and you see little circles cut out on all the edges of your red bud, that's this little lady, and she lines her nest cells with the leaves. Talking about gay feathers, Jordan talked a little bit about a gay feather. That particular one that she talked about was actually a release from the East Texas Plant Material Center where I work. That was the Hollywood's thick spike gay feather. That's a common name, but I hate thick spike gay feather. Whatever. It's not my story. So one of the ones that we're looking at currently as a plant release for the East Texas Plant Material Center is the Liatris sporosa. It's got a fairly big range in the western coastal plain. We've been talking about that today. East Texas, western Louisiana, kind of curving up into the southern tip of Arkansas and Oklahoma. This has a pretty good range through there, and this is a species I think would work well in conservation plantings, and it's pretty abundant. So we want to be able to produce local-ish genetics for the public, and that's kind of what we do. So we're looking at this one next. I really like this one. This is a really sort of Dr. Seussable type plant. So I had a picture at where we were yesterday, where we stopped to put and we collected some seeds and stuff. So in this particular landscape, in this landowner's property, he had done some thinning of some longleaf pine. He planted longleaf pine, and he thinned it last year every 5th row. And all of a sudden, on one of those openings, it was a sea of this scaly blazing star, an absolute sea of that. And that was likely due to the corms that were just sitting dormant, waiting to be released, waiting for that sunlight to hit that ground. And so I think that's why that population was so abundant. And here's where we're going to confuse you, Jordan. Okay, so we initially thought this particular plant, we didn't see it in bud, we saw it in bloom. We initially thought this was Liatris aspera, the button gay feather, but upon closer inspection, this is where you get your filiary fairies. If you have a really great botanist who can judge the filaries. I have a filary fairy named Sonia Hill. She's absolutely fabulous, and she can look at these things and tell you, oh no, it's not this species, it's that species. So this is actually Liatris scarulosa. Sorry, Jordan. we went through Jordan's nursery before our fall plant sale, and we were heating out the Liatris, but I told her all on that. This one is really cool. It's a very tall Liatris, very sandy soils, very sandhill oriented, and the individual inflorescences are very, very large. I like the common name on Liatris aspera, the one that looks a lot like that, because it's called button gay feather, and it's got really big buttons that are purple inflorescences. Now, y'all remember way back, I don't know, in the 80s or the 90s when Prince was changing his name, and he was the artist formerly known as Prince. Well, I'm calling this the Liatris formerly known as elegans. So we talked a little bit this morning, Dr. Van Clay kind of touched on this a little bit on how the taxonomic things are changing. And so this is one of the ones that got split. We're sometimes lumpers, we're sometimes splitters. This is the gay feathers that have gotten split into 3 different groups. So it was elegans, and now it's 3 distinct species. And so we think of this one as Bridges eye. Okay, and so we see the yellow bracts, but this is Bridges eye also. And so, I threw this up on iNaturalist. I initially called it elegans because that's what we learned it as. Threw it up on iNaturalist as Liatris Bridges eye, and I had a lot of pushback from that. And people were saying, no, this is Hesper elegans. This is the other species in that split group. But it literally comes down to the corm, the shape of the corm, and the divergent filaries. So these filaries actually kind of split off the flowers, even though it's a completely different color form than what is typically known as Bridges eye. So I'm gonna just call it gay feather. I don't know. It is super abundant on this particular property. Within the 3,300 acres, there are a number of different locations where it's just covering hillsides, and it is just. So I scared the landowner a little bit. He's kind of a good old boy, and so we were out riding around, and I got out to this just gigantic patch of this particular Liatris, and I wanted to do the sound of music. I wanted to make sure, and he thought, oh my God, what did I get myself into? So, but that's what we're doing. So it was super abundant. So I know Matt showed a picture of like just Picnistacia in a situation like this, but this is like just bridges out on this particular property.
What month was that
Either October or November.
Not
They still have
recently.
they still have a little bit of color to them, but they're finishing up. They're not into seed yet, and the seed that's there is not mature. But it's a late bloomer, and that's what we like to see in our pollinator world is those late bloomers. And this one is really rare. Matt did mention this one in his talk yesterday about East Texas endemics. If you note this, and I put a range map up here. I have to use USDA because I work with the USDA. So Jordan mentioned BOAP, the Biota of North America project, and so those are two entities that have these types of range maps. When you get into USDA plants, you can actually zoom in to get the county level like this. And the one thing I like about BONAP a little bit more than the range maps with NRCS with USDA is that BONAP will put all of the species within a genus on one page. And so that's, as a non-botanist, that is a tool for you to help you eliminate some particular species that you're looking at. Oftentimes we can narrow it down to the genera, and so that's what I like about BONAP. But with the USDA plants, you can actually go further into the classification of the plants and a lot more information about that. Sometimes they have fact sheets associated with the particular plants in there. So we see this, and it's not in Nacogdoches County. I can tell Nacogdoches County I'm a transplant. I've been here 20 years, but I'm a transplant. It looks like a tornado, so that's how I know how to find Nacogdoches. But it's not occurring in my county. Well, I can say, yes, it is. And so what I need to do is I actually need to collect a sample and send it into Dr. Van Clay so that it can be recorded in Nacogdoches County. It actually occurs in my forest. I work at the East Texas Plant Materials Center in the Angelina National Forest, and actually it occurs out there too. So I need to take some data and collect some samples so that we can say that it does occur here. So there are several different mints. I love things in the mint family. Of course, I love minty fragrances, but I also like pollinators, and the asters and the mints and milkweeds are great for pollinators. Jordan did talk about the narrowleaf mountain mint. This is really abundant on Simon's property, on Winston's property. And Jordan did mention something about the smell of the foliage. So sometimes it smells like nothing at all. Sometimes it smells like a very sharp mint. And so sometimes it has like lemon or orangish undertones to the fragrance. It's really interesting. So you just have to kind of be one with the plants and feel them and taste them and touch them. Don't taste it unless you know what it is. So what we like to say, plants are edible. All plants are edible at least once. All mushrooms are edible for sure at least once. We don't know about the second time. And of course, I think that probably Jordan and I were texting each other at the very same time about zebra swallowtails on this particular plant, and it's just a magnet for that particular butterfly. And the white leaf mountain mint, I always call this the white bracted mountain mint. It makes pretty much more sense. This photo was taken maybe a week ago, and you can see the cooler temperatures have really brought out that pubescence in the bracts and how much whiter they are. The individual flowers are really pretty tiny, but I like the overall effect of all that white at the top of the white leaf mountain mint. And this has a really cool story. We work with tribal youth every summer, and we have a representative from the Alabama Coushatta reservation that comes with them, an adult representative. And she was telling me about mountain mint, and she was saying that her grandmother used to, when she had bad dreams, she would put some mountain mint on her pillow, and the bad dreams would go away. So we had to go through the forest and find both the mountain mints to see which one it was. And we found that one, the slender leaf mountain mint. She said, no, that's not it. And then we got to this one. She said, that's it. That triggered a memory from her grandmother that she had used in her childhood. So we like to we like to recognize those culturally significant plants, and we like to bring those stories forward too. So Leslie, I don't know if maybe that's something you could look at. So we talked about bee balm. I love bee balm. I like bee butts, and I cannot lie. I've done a lot of pollinator presentations, and I've tried like every flower I have in there. I tried to get a bee behind in there. So this is actually this is another type of longhorn bee. You can tell this one, it's Melissoides vermiculata, but it has headlights on the rear end. So that's how it's an identifying characteristic of this particular bee. But oftentimes on the bee balm, the wild bergamot, you'll see lots of bees, and they're just really make themselves at home. They really take their time going through there, collecting all that nectar and all that pollen. How many of y'all know how to tell a female bee from a male bee? No? We don't know? Good, I get to teach y'all something. So I know that this is a lady right here because she has a pollen collection, a way to collect pollen. The leafcutter bee I showed earlier, her collection system was on her abdomen. And most of the other female bees, native bees, will collect pollen on their hind legs. So if you see a big pollen basket or a lot of fuzz or fur on the back legs and there's pollen on it, that's a female. She's taking that pollen back to her brood to feed her brood. Males don't serve a lot of purposes, so they're there for one thing. Sorry. And of course, this is a beautiful little zebra swallowtail. And this is spotted bee balm. Some people love this plant, some people hate this plant. It has a very musky fragrance almost. I like it. My boss, this is a plant that he absolutely hates because he can't stand the smell of it, but I really do like the smell of it. And it's really great. I always see bumblebees on there. This is an American bumblebee, you can tell because he's got a really large yellow spot on his abdomen right here. And I can tell it's a he because there's no pollen sac on his hind leg. These actually, the bracts are what's given us this purplish pink color, and the flowers are these little spotted yellow things right here. And then, of course, we have pitcher sage here. We don't have too many salvias, unfortunately, native to the eastern part of Texas. We have the wireless sage and the pitcher sage. This one will bloom from midsummer all the way into the first part of November. So we didn't see any on this trip, but we did about 2 weeks ago. We did see some on this property. They're very tall, so they're kind of hard to spot at first because they're kind of singular stalked and very tall. But once you start seeing them, they're really gorgeous. And we were finding lots of eastern black swallowtail butterflies nectaring on this in late summer. We talked about goldenrod. I don't have to give you the lecture on allergies on goldenrod. So unless that bee's flying that pollen straight up your nose, you know this is not causing your allergies. A lot of times goldenrod gets a bad rap, and I'm guilty of that too, because what we see a lot of are these monocultures of Solidago altissima, the big tall goldenrod, and they can easily, especially in disturbed sites, take over the spot. So I'm not going to put that in my garden. I don't want a monoculture. I don't want just ice cream on the buffet. I want fried chicken and green beans and all the other things. But there's a whole bunch of native goldenrods that are way more behaved, that will stay, even if they do run, they don't run a whole lot. They'll just make a nice little colony and kind of stop there. And some are actually bunch types. So this rough goldenrod, this is sort of, I've been eyeing this one for a really long time, and I think I really like it. Most of the goldenrods found on this property are on dry sites, so they're very drought tolerant. And of course, they're blooming later in the season. So this is Solidago gradula. And I'll get you this if you don't have it. This is, I think this is going to be my favorite. I really like the foliage. The foliage is really glossy. It's really fine. It's got a really cool texture. It goes back and forth from oligonuran to Solidago. So it's one of the ones that kind of, we can't decide what our names are these days. But it currently resides in the genus Solidago. The flat top goldenrod, and they are singular. They're bunch type, and they're really low growing. So they're very mannerly, and I like that for the ones. And the Solidago petiolaris, this is not very common. This is the downy ragged goldenrod, and this is another one that's a little bit more well behaved. I've actually only seen this on Simon's property. I've only seen this in one particular spot. I find this one everywhere, the rough goldenrod. And of course, the wrinkled leaf goldenrod Solidago rugosa is one that's actually available in the nursery trade, but I don't know that it's southern genetics, so that's kind of my goal. This one does kind of form a little bit of a colony, but again, it's not as aggressive as that big tall goldenrod. 10 minutes. Okay, rare and interesting. We'll do that real quick. So there's a lot of plants, like I said, that are on my bucket list, and there's a lot of plants that I didn't know were on my bucket list. And I didn't know that featherbells were on my bucket list until I found a featherbell. First of all, it's got a really cool name, featherbell. Who doesn't want to be a featherbell? I want to be a featherbell. These are just spectacular. When you find a little colony of these, it's absolutely magical. And they smell divine. So it's just like a warm honey bath of honey that floats through the air if you catch them on a good warm afternoon. And this is its cousin, the Virginia bunchflower. This one is a little bit more localized. It has to have a little bit of a seep. It has to be well drained, but it has to have a little bit of moisture in the soil. And this one is a little green, but it will whiten up as it matures. And so clematis is undergoing, I don't know, renaming, whatnot. We would have called this picture eye 5 years ago. I don't know if y'all know the work of Dwayne Estes out of Southeastern Grasslands at Boston P University. So he's splitting the clematis up, and I believe this is going to be called Arnicola sometime soon. It's not in a publication just yet, as far as I know. So we'll call it clematis picture eye. But they're just cute little fairy bells. I mean, they're just wonderful. They're mannerly vines. They don't have tendrils, so they don't grab onto things. They just sort of kind of grow and drape over things. This is really cool. How many of y'all have ever seen a solid yellow blanket flower? That's pretty cool. We got one in the room. Yay! So this is Gaillardia aestivalis variety flavivirens, and this I've never seen it either. This is the first time on this particular property that I've seen this. Very sandy site. It's growing alongside Queen's Delight and the Kuntia, so super sandy soils. Very drought tolerant. And Jordan told us that the host plant for the Zebra swallowtail is the pawpaw. The Winstons don't have the giant pawpaw on their site. They don't have a lot of clay soils, but they have a lot of sandy soils. So the dwarf pawpaw or the small flower pawpaw occurs on their land. The fruit is edible, but when it's ripe, the raccoons will get it before you find it. So it's very difficult to find any fruit because, well, one, you have to have lots of friends, so you have to have more than one, right? And then you have to feed the raccoons to it. Mr. Winston puts cages over his so that the kids don't get it. As you can see, the flower is nothing to write home about. It's really unattractive. It kind of hangs down so you don't see it. It doesn't shine in your face. I mean, it smells a little bit like dead meat, but it's pollinated by a fly. Jordan mentioned that flies were pollinating some of her flowers. We would not have chocolate if they weren't for flies. So that may gross people out, but it is what it is. Flies are excellent pollinators. One of the really cool things that only occurs in East Texas is the Henry spider lily. I don't know who Henry is, but he must have been a pretty cool dude. This one actually, you can see that this has been recently burned. That's probably in about, I would say March or April, and you see the foliage on this, and then it completely dies to the ground. And then in late summer, it throws kind of like a spider lily would, like forest wood. It throws up its blooms just completely naked, devoid of foliage. Definitely occurs in a more dry upland site, and they're spectacular when they are in bloom. This is cool. This is a coreopsis. You think, oh, it's just a tick seed, but this is one that's very rare. And look, we're in a hole again. It doesn't occur in Nacogdoches County, except we found it in Nacogdoches County. I think this is not going to make it to the horticultural world because it's just really very short-lived and kind of finicky. But it was really neat to find that on this property. We're finding things like that are either endemic to East Texas or on the very western edge of the range, or not even reported in our area. I think that's cool. And this is one of the ones that occurs. We're right here. So it is the western edge. No, not allied. We're right here. See, it doesn't even occur in Nacogdoches County. But have to collect it. This is the Carolina thistle, or the soft thistle. It's a beautiful plant. It's not a huge thistle, but you know how thistles sometimes can be really sort of aggressive looking and scary? This one is not. And I don't know, how many of y'all have seen the propeller flower? These are really cool, aren't they? This is actually an iris family member, Alophia dromundii, and the flowers are only open for a day, but they tend to put several out over several periods of days, and then they'll kind of go dormant and they'll come back and do it again. And here's the one that we didn't get to see yesterday because it's November, whatever it is today. This is Tetragonitheca ludoficiana. And that's one of the botanical names that I really like to say. This again occurs on very deep sands. This is where the world milkweed occurred on this particular property. I find this with that yellow light just bridgesite up north of town up towards Tonkawa. It's just a really neat plant. Very thick, interesting foliage, very drought tolerant too, and that's what we like. I think that Tephrosia has a place in the landscape. I don't know about the Anabrachioides. It's kind of loose and rangy, but the Virginia Tephrosia, or goat's root, I think is really spectacular. It's got very compact, silvery, grayish foliage, and then of course you see the multi-blooms, the yellow and pink blooms on the flowers. Do I think this is commercial? I don't know. The range is very, very limited on both of these species. We think this is not the white prairie clover or the purple prairie clover that we find available at seed companies, but it's really pretty, really awfully pretty. Again, this one right here, the purple one, the silky prairie clover, is the western extent of the range. They're neat though, and you can see how big that area was. That was another, Sound of Music moment for me right there, because that was a really cool area location. One of the ones that we're looking at with our partners in crime, the Texas Native Seeds program, is the Rattlesnake Master. This is an excellent pollinator plant. I think this is actually a wasp. I thought this was a green metallic sweat bee, but I think it's actually a wasp. I'm not sure. But you can see each of these little dots is a flower, and so the flowers are not like in your face, but they're abundant. So there's lots of little flowers on that plant. And one of the things that I like to look for when I put my horticulture hat on is something different, and that's what we see here. This is a Texas ironweed. This is pretty abundant. It's fairly common. It's not in the. I don't think it's in the trade. But I did find a pink form of that. So I think that's what we're looking for. And when we're looking for garden-esque plants, we're looking for something a little bit different, something that can kind of extend the color palette if we're a particular,
Was the soil different maybe?
No. So I dug it up and moved it and propagated it. And every soil that I planted in is that. It's just a color variation. This is my bucket list. This is my dream. This is also my soapbox, because a lot of people say Echinacea purpurea is a Texas native. Well, y'all look up. This is your challenge. Look up on either USDA Plants or BONAP and see what the Texas range of Echinacea purpurea is. Okay, so it doesn't occur in East Texas. It doesn't occur anywhere in East Texas. This is our sandwind coneflower. I think Peter said this is probably my favorite plant, and he is absolutely 100% correct. And this is one that I'm going to look at for a plant release, because you cannot buy this commercially, whether in seed form or in plant form, unless you go to Jordan's Plant Zone. So this is one I'm looking to release for a conservation plant release, because it is my favorite plant. Here's my disclaimer, because I work for the government. Do y'all have any questions?
I have a question.
You can go ahead.
You said you were propagating the ironweed. I'm curious, do you do that from stem cuttings?
I do that from stem cuttings, and so on Monarda, on bee bombs, on Vernonia, and then on phlox. You always do stem cuttings before they start to flower because they're really difficult.
Okay.
They're difficult to root after they start to flower. Next.
Okay, so we have a lot of stray cats in our neighborhood, and they brought fleas into my yard before, and so I'm terrified to put any sand down to get the sandier plants like the milkweeds and stuff. And so, how could I do that without? I mean, is there? Because fleas love sand, and I'm terrified.
What am I? What is the little organism that you can sprinkle? Nematodes.
Nematodes.
Nematodes. So try that.
Okay,
So
and it wouldn't hurt the butterflies and caterpillars or anything else. It would just go after the fleas. Or
I don't know how specific it is, but
Yeah.
if the butterflies are not landing in the soil, they're not living
Right.
in the soil.
yeah,
so,
that's true. Yeah,
So, I mean, I would do some research on it, but I know that the nematodes do help dissipate flea populations.
okay.
So are you trying to make like a wild? and
Just a
I'll
little
tell you
area
this,
where I can have the plants that are more
the more
sand tolerant.
diversity, the more floral diversity you can have on your property,
Yeah,
the more in balance your insect population is going to be. So you're
Uh-huh.
going to start bringing those predatory insects in there that will help keep that under control. So
Okay.
the more flowers, the more diversity you bring in,
uh-huh.
that's going to help in that situation too. So
Okay.
you might try to attack the flea situation first, and then.
Well, I don't have them now.
You don't have
No,
them
no. This was like years ago. But
Oh.
yeah, but no, I want to. If somebody had told me that sand, and
What
so
what I would do
wanna-
in your situation is
Yeah.
choose the appropriate plants for the soil type you have.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Right.
So I wouldn't
Instead of
necessarily
adding
put the cardinal flower that we were talking about in
Yeah.
the last session in a sandy location without any water.
Yeah.
So choose the appropriate plant, the right plant, right place.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
just because a native plant is native doesn't mean it's drought tolerant per se.
Right.
So you just have to know what habitat type it comes from.
Well, I really like the plastic milkweed, and that's why I was wanting to go
Yeah,
there
and
with
so
the sand.
in that situation, unless you have real heavy clay sands,
Uh-huh.
I would incorporate mycorrhiza in your growing regime, whether it be in the ground or in a container situation.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks for the presentation. It's cool to see. I work in Wise County, which is north central Texas, and there's a lot of similarities. A lot of the species that you're showing here on the sandy soil we encounter all the way up there, so it's cool to see. I was wondering if in your Monarda fasciculosa populations, do you find individuals with powdery mildew problems like in the wild? And I was wondering if you see any of that in your surveys.
I've seen it more in a garden setting than I have in the wild. So I'm not saying it's not there. I just have not occurred. I've not encountered it in the wild.
Interesting.
But yes, I don't doubt that it's an issue.
I think it depends on how much water you have,
Well, I
rain
think
you have.
it's definitely situational for the year, for what kind of climate we're having, whether it's a dry summer or a moist, hot summer.
Curious if any of these species you talked about today depend on fire for reasons other than opening up the canopy. Like, do any need the ash to increase the alkalinity, or do any need like the heat to germinate?
No, I have in my experience growing these off-site, I don't experience that. The biggest answer that the question that fire answers here is keeping that understory open.
Got it.
So it's basically for competition, to reduce competition.
Longleaf pine doesn't compete. Longleaf pine doesn't compete.
Longleaf
There's
pine-
other,
Well-
oaks get up to it.
But Yale-pines compete and sweet gums compete, and I'm going to be the bad guy and say beautyberry compete.
Oh, yeah.
So that it
That's
keeps
wrong.
that encroachment, that shrubby encroachment from out competing all those things.
Yeah, and also back to your, earlier in your program when you were talking about fire, are there any studies going on to see what the fire does as far as the microbial matter, in the soil? What is the effect? Does it have detrimental? I mean, it sounds like everything's great about fire, but is there something?
So I don't specifically know to the effect on the microbial component. I know that I just recently read a study about carbon sequestration and that actually low intensity frequent fires actually helps carbon sequestration in the soil.
Okay.
So I think everything in balance is a good thing. It's when we get to those catastrophic fires, and that's when it starts affecting the microbes and
So
things like
there's really
that.
been no study of it.
We've
To
done
my
some,
knowledge.
stuff, right before you got over there. And we did a 3-year study looking at all this stuff, everything you can imagine. And on the Winston property, we found that there was just a different subset in general. And in the areas where no fire at all, there was just a giant diversity. Within that fired area, it was very specific, but it didn't weigh as much. Like the biomass was much reduced, but it was a very tight subset. And then you compare it to like a bottomland site that we had, and in the times it was flooded, it was almost absent. But then in the summertime, when we had drawdown, it had an incredible amount of biomass, but not much diversity either. So it just appears there's like a sweet little niche right there where the mycorrhizae live. But when you start talking soil health, it doesn't look as great because everybody's worried about biomass and the amount of sequestration. But the fire itself, it's almost like it has to be this little special niche, like the longleaf pike or something like that.
I mean, I was thinking like a study of like maybe, figuring out that how much time you need between fires for the,
We didn't get that deep.
Okay.
Just very, very,
Okay.
very top level stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we have a bog area, and unfortunately we have ferns galore out there, all kinds of ferns. And we were wanting to burn it. But of course, the only time you can burn a bog is like in the driest time as this. And we also have the fringe orchids. And so I'm afraid to burn because of the fringe orchids. And then there's other orchids out there also. But then we also have a grass that I would like to get rid of. I said something to Peter about the grass because I saw some yesterday, and he said it would not kill that.
The fire would not kill
yeah,
that?
he said that it would not kill that grass, and that but it would kill the ferns. At least it won't kill the ferns either. Oh gosh.
When typically when fires run through box systems like that, it's gonna take out that woody component before it takes out anything.
Okay, would it take out my orchids and stuff?
Depending on what time of year.
Uh-huh.
you burn
Well,
it,
they
you'll
bloom in
clearly-
August. That's what's bad.
Yeah, and so I don't have enough teeth in that experience to recommend something to you.
I just don't want them to. I don't want the ferns and that grass to take over the orchids. That's what I'm trying to keep from happening.
Yeah, that's understandable. I'm sorry I don't have an answer.
Okay.
I have one more question. So, kind of related to another question. So we know that like some seeds do respond to smoke in terms of stratifying. I wonder if there's any studies that involve the use of something, say like a liquid smoke, that's actually chemically simple. So you would actually wash your seeds in that.
If you look for studies, you're going to find them. I know that Dr. Barnes at SFA has done studies with liquid smoke. I don't know what the results of that were, but I know that people are doing that. I don't know how significant that treatment is with just regular stratification, but that's something, I think that's something that's very interesting. We're done. We're done.